Welcome to the Vibrantly You podcast. We're your hosts, Megan Martineau
and Caitlin Cipriano. In this podcast, we talk about fitness and nutrition on your motherhood journey. Whether you are trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or beyond, you are welcome here.
Nothing is off limits, and our goal is to support you in this important season of life so that you can feel vibrantly you. As a reminder, this information is not medical advice. Please see the show notes for more details. Welcome back to the Vibrantly You podcast. Today I am doing a solo episode, and we are going to be talking about dropping the first trimester exercise guilt. So this is something that I see come up for a lot of people. And today I just want to talk through, what's going on in the first trimester, why it can be so hard to exercise, and just how to shift your mindset away from disappointment or expectations not matching reality, and instead give you some tangible things that you can focus on in the first trimester that is still really helpful and beneficial for you as your pregnancy progresses. So let's start with what the heck's going on in the first trimester. Why is it so hard to exercise? So for a lot of people, they're starting to experience fatigue, nausea, food aversions, and these things can come on quite suddenly and honestly be very debilitating. I feel like for most people, these symptoms, if they're going to happen, start around weeks 6 to 8. So again, this is kind of like 2 to 4 weeks potentially after you find out you are pregnant. So happens really, really quickly. And the fatigue is not even like just being tired. It is like full body fatigue where you just cannot get up and do anything. And your motivation too is at like an all-time low, which is totally understandable. And I think it's important to remember that your body is working so hard in the first trimester. It is not only working on, the cell division of the embryo of your baby, but you're also building the placenta. You are both building a baby and an organ from scratch. Like that is a lot of hard work. Your body is working so hard. So if you don't have the energy or the ability to do anything else, that is okay. And I think it's really important to bring that into perspective. But that being said, especially if you were active pre-pregnancy, for a lot of people, they can have this idea in their mind of like, oh, when I'm pregnant, I'm going to continue with my workouts. I'm going to stay active. I'm going to be that mom in the gym lifting all the way up until my due date. And you start to like come up with this picture in your head of what your pregnancy is going to look like. And then when first trimester hits, and again, maybe you're really nauseous, maybe you're throwing up all the time. You don't just have morning sickness, but you're throwing up all day long. You cannot work out. Like it's just not happening. And so then you start to feel really bad, and maybe you're like berating yourself, or like talking down to yourself. What's wrong with me? I need to just get it together. I need to be more motivated. Whatever it is. We just tend to be really hard on ourselves in this first trimester. And I do just want to validate that because I do think it's really hard when the expectations don't match reality. And I know that Caitlin and I talked about this in an episode. So we talked about this in regards to both fitness and nutrition in episodes 54 and 55. So I will link those below. But that expectation versus reality can be really hard for us to wrap our brains around. And I think there's also some grieving in that, right? Like you are grieving the person that you were before who had these plans, and now the plans that you had are not happening, and it's due to something that is completely out of your control. And so that can cause grief and sadness, and that is totally understandable. And I think it's really important to work through those feelings as well, rather than just like kind of pushing them down or getting down on yourself. I always recommend getting a therapist and being like established with a therapist in pregnancy because pregnancy is just so wild and we go through so much. And I also think just having someone who knows you and understands you, especially heading into postpartum, is so, so beneficial and can make a world of difference in that postpartum transition. So that's just my little plug for therapy. And I will also put a link at the bottom for PSI, which is a resource for perinatal mental health. So I just want to reiterate, it is totally okay if your reality does not match the expectations. That does not mean you're failing. And honestly, I try to remind people to take it week by week, first of all, but also trimester by trimester, because even though when you are in the first trimester and you feel like absolute death and you're like, I am never going to feel normal again. Like, personal story from me in my first trimester with my daughter. So I had a 2-year old running around. I had to take care of him. So I couldn't just like, rot on the couch, which is what I wanted to do. I had all day nausea. I was throwing up throughout the day. Not all day long, but like any time of day, it could hit me really. And I had really bad food aversions. And I remember like laying on the couch trying to watch a TV show, like my son was playing, and a commercial came on for food. And I was like, I can't even watch this anymore. Or, if like people would be eating food in the show, like it would make me overwhelmingly sad because I was like, they can just eat whatever they want, even though it's not real, right? I was watching a TV show, but I would get like overwhelmingly upset, being like, they can eat anything they want and I can't, and I'm never gonna be able to do that again. Like it just felt so overwhelming, and like this is gonna be my reality forever. And I think that's a really common thing that people experience in the first trimester because when you are in the suck, it really sucks and it really feels like this is going to be how your life is going to be forever. And that is a horrible feeling. And so I just want to remind you that for many people, of course, not everybody, but for many people, you get into that second trimester and it gets better. And I also just want to throw it out there too. There are medications that are safe that you can take in pregnancy that help with these things. So make sure you're talking to your doctor if you are at the point where it is so debilitating that you cannot get through your day. Have a conversation with your doctor. We also did a couple episodes with Caitlin talking about food aversions and nausea and how you can support your body through nutrition. And that was one of the very first episodes we did. It's episode number 2. So I'll also link that in the show notes. That's one of our most popular episodes. But that can be really, really helpful in the first trimester. Okay, so now I want to shift gears to what can you do in the first trimester that maybe feels a little more realistic or doable, especially if you are craving some movement, but you just don't have the capacity or the energy to do a full quote unquote workout. I always recommend that people do breath work and mobility. Those two things are so important throughout the entirety of pregnancy. And if you can learn how to do them and learn how to do them well in the first trimester before you have a belly, before you have pelvic pain and back pain and all of these other things, you are really setting yourself up for success. So 360 breathing, that is when you are really working on coordinating your diaphragm and your pelvic floor and your abdominal wall. So on that inhale breath, you're getting nice expansion in the rib cage in all directions. That's where the 360 comes in. You're getting length and release in the pelvic floor on that inhale breath. And then on the exhale, everything just comes back in. It sounds really simple. It can be really hard to create that mind-body connection and really be intentional with it. So I always recommend that people practice this daily. Do something like habit stacking. You can do it when you're laying in bed at night, when you're in the shower. I do find that if you're learning this for the first time, laying down is often easier, or sitting down. Usually standing is more difficult. Even laying on your side can be an easy way to practice this. And then in terms of mobility, this is more than just stretching. So this is incorporating more like full range of motion and especially focusing on your hips. So, working on internal and external rotation, starting to learn about your pelvic floor and the role that your pelvic floor plays in pregnancy and in birth, and maybe even looking ahead to what are things I need to consider about my pelvic floor heading into postpartum. The first trimester, if you're feeling really crappy, is a great time to start researching. And this can be the same for like childbirth ed and stuff like that. If you can't move a whole lot, do some research. That can be a good time to do that, especially before you're like super overwhelmed. And then get outside for walks if you can. Oftentimes, fresh air and a change in environment can help us quite a bit, especially when we're dealing with fatigue and nausea and aversions. If you're in a colder climate or it's cold when you are in your first trimester, that like blast of cold air can really help reduce the nausea. Sometimes the heat can be a little tricky, especially if you are in like a more humid environment and it's the middle of the summer. So definitely make sure that you're hydrating if that's the case, and maybe not overly exerting yourself. So definitely take that into consideration as well. But just getting a walk in is so great for your mental health and, of course, your physical health and cardiovascular system. So, walks are fantastic. Even if you have like a walking pad inside that you can use, that is great. So, really, in terms of movement, that's what I like people to focus on in the first trimester if they're not feeling their best is the 360 breathing, mobility, especially focusing on hip mobility, educating yourself about the pelvic floor, and then going on walks if you are able to. And if you have a little more energy where you're like, I could do a little more than that, but like I also can't go to the gym, even doing exercises where you're lower to the ground or you're able to use furniture or props, to hold your body up, that can feel a little less overwhelming, just more doable, things like hip thrusts where you're like leaning on your couch or you're doing glute bridges on the floor or exercises where you can lay on the floor, like utilize the things in your space to lean on. And that can be supportive and just make it feel less daunting. So that's another tool I like to utilize as well. I did record a whole episode talking about how to adjust your workouts in the first trimester. So that would be a great episode to listen in addition to this one if you are in that stage of life and your pregnancy. So that is episode 3. Again, pairs really well with episode number 2, which was the nausea and food aversions that Caitlin did. So you can go check those out. I will drop those in the show notes. If you have any questions or you just want to vent about the first trimester and no one knows you're pregnant yet, feel free to DM me on Instagram. Your secret is safe with me, and I'm happy to chat with you. Otherwise, I will see you back here next week for another episode.